The movie begins with a man delivering letters to distant houses in the middle of a forest. He arrives at a house where a woman is washing clothes stained with blood. He knocks on the door, but the woman doesn't hear him because she's listening to loud music. At this moment, the man suddenly hears creaking noises coming from the basement of the house. Thinking someone might be trapped there, he opens a wooden window and tries to help. Unfortunately, out of nowhere, he is pulled inside by a force he cannot see. The scene then changes to 30 years later, when a group of young people is going to a forest to camp. This trip is called a digital detox, where these young people are sent by their parents because of their addiction to the internet and electronic devices. When they arrive, the person in charge welcomes them and says it's a great chance to set aside their addiction and connect more with nature. The 50 young people are divided into teams, with a leader for each group. Each group has a function, and one of them would have to spend 3 days in the middle of the forest. They are then forced to hand over their cell phones and prepare for the journey. In a cabin in the forest, we see the same woman from 30 years ago, but now she's much older. She was hunting a deer and is trying to drag it to the basement, but she slipped and fell in there. Shortly after, a horrible creature appears and kills the woman on the spot. Hey, what would you do if you were trapped in a forest with a bloodthirsty supernatural creature? The movie I'm going to summarize is called Nobody Sleeps in the Woods Tonight. It's a very good Polish film that mixes fantasy, horror, and mystery. Have you watched Wrong Turn? This movie is very similar, so if you enjoyed that saga, you'll enjoy this one too. But before getting into the summary, I invite you to subscribe to the channel, hit the notification bell, and leave a like to receive the best recaps. After handing over their cell phones, the young people are preparing for a 3-day hike in the forest. We then see Counselor Isa's group, which includes Zosia, who is very quiet and doesn't like to talk, Daniel, the skinny guy who thinks he's strong, Anelia, the most popular blonde in school but somewhat shallow, Julik, the very intelligent nerd who loves games, and a boy named Bartek, who is gay but afraid to come out for fear of being attacked. Before they leave, a local priest arrives in a nice car and greets everyone. He says that modern technology is the greatest danger of this century and hopes they can deal with it. He says a prayer for the young people and also sprinkles holy water on their cell phones and laptops. Afterward, Isa's group sets off for the camp, and during the hike, Julik shows interest in Zosia. He comments that her necklace reminds him of the Terminator movie. This makes her smile, and she tells him it's a family keepsake. Meanwhile, Daniel tries to flirt with Anelia, but is frequently interrupted by Bartek. Getting irritated, he begins to offend him with prejudiced comments. The two end up fighting physically, and Daniel ends up pushing Bartek to the ground, injuring his leg. Fortunately, before the situation can get worse, the others intervene and separate. Sometime later, when Julik steps away to urinate, he finds the mangled body of a deer. Thinking a large animal is nearby, he gets scared and calls everyone to investigate. But Isa explains that it's just a trap set by illegal hunters and asks everyone to continue walking. Zosia looks around and sees a strange hand near a tree. This frightens her, but she decides not to tell anyone. Later, the group sets up their camp in the middle of the forest. They sit around a campfire, and Isa asks each one to start talking about why they were sent to the camp. Julik reveals that he likes games and has a YouTube channel with 1 million followers. I hope my channel reaches that level someday. That's why I'm counting on you to subscribe and leave a like. Julik used to miss a lot of school to play, which made his parents angry. He also says that he was about to go to South Korea for a competition with a prize of $500,000. However, his parents didn't agree and sent him to this camp instead. When it was Zosia's turn to speak, Isa looks at her file and decided to stop the interrogation. At night, everyone goes to sleep, but Daniel is restless, so he goes to a nearby lake to smoke a cigarette. Anelia joins him and also starts smoking. They begin to flirt, and during the conversation, Anelia discovers that Daniel has never had sex before. She decides to make this night special for him, and they get intimate. After that, Anelia returns to her tent while Daniel takes out a cell phone hidden in his clothes. He starts looking at girls' profiles on a dating app, not realizing that someone is lurking behind him. Soon after, a large man with many wounds appears and attacks Daniel. Unfortunately, he ends up killing Daniel, repeatedly smashing his body against a tree. In the next scene, we see Zosia traveling by car with her family, all apparently happy. She's playing with her sister in the back seat while her father takes a picture with her mother. Because of this distraction, the car gets involved in a tragic, fatal accident. At this moment, Zosha wakes up scared from a bad dream, and it seems that her entire family died in that accident. Later, the group prepares for another day of hiking, but they can't find Daniel. Everyone gets worried, and Anelia mentions that she saw him by the lake the night before. She explains that they talked for a while before she returned to her tent. When they reach the lake, they can't find him, but they see red marks on the tree. The young people begin to panic, but Isa reassures them, saying it's not blood, but the liquid from the tree. After that, she suggests they should split up and look for Daniel. Julik is very scared and remembers how in horror movies everyone dies when the group separates. He suggests they stay together, but everyone ignores his idea. Isa, Zosia, and Julik then leave to look for Daniel, while the other two stay behind in case he returns. Shortly after, the trio arrives at the house that appears at the beginning of the film. They decide to enter to ask for help, but find no one inside. They start looking around and end up going to the basement after hearing a noise. There, they find several bodies, including Daniel's, which shocks them. Before they can do anything, a very large man arrives at the house, causing them to close the basement door and hide. Julik almost vomits because of the terrible smell, but Isa stops him. Soon after, the killer enters the basement, and the group desperately tries to escape through the window. Zosha and Julik manage to escape, but when Isa tries to leave, she notices that Daniel's phone is ringing in her pocket. Determined to get the cell phone, she decides to stay and face the monster. Unfortunately, this proves to be a big mistake, as the killer easily overpowers Isa and tosses her head at Zosha and Julik's feet. Shocked, the two immediately flee from there. Meanwhile, Anelia and Bartek are talking near the lake. Bartek tells Anelia about how difficult it is to be gay in such a prejudiced town. Anelia shares her own difficulties, like everyone thinking she is a naive and easy woman. While they are in the middle of the conversation, when he looks to the side, he sees Anelia with a metal bar in her head. This part gave me a fright. I wasn't expecting that. She dies instantly, leaving Bartek terrified, who flees from there and ends up reaching a church. Meanwhile, Julik and Zosia discover a house in the forest and find an elderly man there. The man invites them in, and they tell him about a deformed monster that killed their friends. They begin to panic and ask for a phone to call the police. However, the old man reassures them, saying there is no phone available. It is then revealed that he is the mailman who was attacked 30 years ago. He lost his legs in the incident, but somehow managed to escape. Then he reveals that there is not just one, but two huge killers. They are twin brothers who were normal children. One day, while playing in the forest, they found a strange stone in the wreckage of a crashed plane. The twins took the stone and brought it home. At night, a dark liquid came out of the stone and entered the twins' bodies, transforming them into fierce predators. The next morning, their mother woke up to the horrific scene of her sons eating their dog. She then locked them in the basement and hunted animals to feed them. Later, the older man suggests that they stay there because he has a gun and food. Julik agrees with the idea, but Zosha insists that they can't simply stand still. She decides to recover Daniel's phone and call the police, causing Julik to have no choice but to follow her. Meanwhile, Bartek finds the priest we saw earlier in the film. He hurriedly tells the whole story and asks for a phone to call the police. The priest says he has a phone, but there is no signal in this area. Soon after, the phone rings, revealing his lie. The priest then quickly hits Bartek on the head, leaving him unconscious. Later, Bartek wakes up and discovers that he is tied to a chair with his mouth covered. Sitting in front of him, the priest says that he has known him since he arrived last year. He criticizes Bartek for his sexual orientation and says that people like him are harmful to society. At this moment, the priest hears noises from outside and goes to check. Suddenly, the deformed killer appears and crushes the priest's head, killing him. The killer then uses a wood chipper to shred the priest's body. In the church, Bartek manages to untie himself from the ropes. When he hears someone approaching, he tries to hide in the confession booth, but it doesn't help much, as the killer finds him. Meanwhile, the other two young people arrive at the killer's house to get the phone back. The plan is simple. Julik needs to distract the killer by making some noise, while Zosha silently goes to the basement to get the phone. Before leaving, she gives Julik a knife to protect himself and kisses him. This gives Julik so much confidence that he goes to the front door and challenges the killer to come out. Meanwhile, Zosha goes to the basement and searches for Daniel's phone. She eventually finds it, but notices that the killer is looking at her. When the monster grabs her by the neck, Julik arrives and attacks the monster with the knife. However, it seems to have no effect on his mutant body. The killer throws Zosia aside and leaves her unconscious. Then he turns to Julik and brutally bites his face. While unconscious, Zosia has a dream about the accident with her family. She sees her father surviving the accident, but severely injured. He is breathing with difficulty and asking for help, but Zosha can't help him, despite her efforts. Then she wakes up in the basement and realizes that she is tied up with chains. Next to her, Julik is seriously injured, with a knife stuck in his abdomen. She tries to use the phone to call for help, but since she doesn't know the password, she tries to use Daniel's hand to unlock it, but all her efforts are in vain. Soon the cell phone runs out of battery and turns off. Julik, feeling desperate, asks Zosha to end his suffering, saying he can't stand the pain anymore. Zosha cries and reluctantly turns the knife in his abdomen, ending his suffering. After that, she uses the knife as a key to free herself from the chains. Initially, Zosha thinks about leaving through the basement window, but remembers all the friends who died, so she decides to face the monsters instead of running away. Zosha finds a large machete and grabs it, then goes upstairs. She sees that one of the twins is sleeping in bed, but the other is not at home. Full of rage, Zosha attacks the monster with the machete several times until it stops moving. After that, she leaves there and runs away. Meanwhile, the elderly mailman is at home when someone knocks on the door. Thinking it's the twins, he grabs his gun and shoots at the door. Upon checking, he discovers Bartek's body, who had managed to escape from the killer and was trying to return home safely. Elsewhere, Zosia runs through the forest for hours until she finds a police officer. She's so traumatized that she can't explain everything that happened. However, the officer notices her desperation and hugs her. The two begin to leave the forest by car, but soon the officer runs over something on the road. The officer thinks someone is dead and gets out of the car to investigate, despite Zosha's pleas not to do so. When the officer sees the monster moving, he draws his gun and tries to shoot. Before he can, the killer strikes him with an axe, resulting in a painful death. Zosha, desperate, manages to get out of the police van and gets into the car to get away from the monster. The problem is that the car won't start. Then the killer climbs onto the car and tries to stab Zosha. At the last moment, she manages to start the car. This throws the monster to the ground, and Zosha takes the opportunity to run over it several times. After making sure that he is really dead, she drives away from there. In the final scene, two drunk men find the monster lying on the road at night. Surprisingly, he is still alive and manages to get up. At home, it is discovered that his brother also survived the knife attacks. He then gets up from the bed and looks at the police lights outside his house. And so the movie ends. Hey, what rating would you give this movie? If you want, I can bring the sequel and bring the full summary of the Wrong Turn saga. Just leave a comment. So that's it. Until the next recap.